Hey, what's up guys? This is Semi here, and it's been a while since I made a video, I kind of took a break from the game there, but TCGOne, the administrator, he kind of stopped updating the program for about a year. So, a lot of people left. It was really hard to find matches, so I kind of lost interest in the game a little bit there. But now he's back, he's updating again. He's actually released Ruby and Sapphire onto TCGOne for career mode. So, things are moving, the ball's moving. So, we're going to get back into making some videos. It's also good for me to be able to help document my thoughts and ideas about the formats as I learn them. So yeah, so this video is going to exclusively focus on Rocket On. That's the Gen 2. That would be a Gen 2 format. And it basically encompasses, let me try to get back to the homepage here. So Rocket On encompasses Team Rocket, the Gym Challenges, Gym Heroes Gym Challenge set, all of the Neo sets, and the Legendary Collection, and some promos. So basically, Rocket, Gym Challenge, and then all the Neo. This is the format for Rocket On Gen 2. The Neo sets changed the game pretty much completely. The biggest change came from this card right here. So we really can't talk about Rocket On without talking about Cleffa. Cleffa is the definitive card of this format because in Gen 1, if you've played it, if you've watched my videos, you know that hand disruption and energy removal are the cornerstones of Gen 1. It's a donking meta. It's a super fast meta where you can burn through your whole deck on turn 1. And a lot of times people got dunked. When you have such powerful hand disruption cards like Rocket's Trap, Rocket's Sneak Attack, and then your hand gets completely destroyed, and there's no real way to draw without, without trainers. You can just get donked within a couple turns. But Cleffa changed all that. Cleffa was in the very first Neo set, and he's got this attack. Eek says shuffle your hand into your deck, then draw 7 cards. So for 1 color synergy, he's a free retreater. He's a baby Pokemon. So the Neo sets introduced a new mechanic called baby Pokemon, where anytime you want to attack one of these guys, you have to flip a coin, and if it's tails, your entire attack does not work. So it slowed down the meta pretty significantly because half your attacks against these guys will not work, and Cleffa will make sure that your hand stays completely full. That you're basically immune to hand disruption with Cleffa. So because of these two combinations, and also energy removal rotating. So, in Gen 1, there was an energy removal card. Let me try to pull it up here. So let's take a look here. So energy removal, choose 1 energy card attached to your opponent's Pokemon, discard it, and then super energy removal, discard 1 energy to discard 2 from the opponent. These things really made 1 energy attacks in Gen 1 the basis of the meta. And 1 energy attacks, they don't do that much damage. You can do at most 20, 30 damage with 1 energy. So, you basically hit the opponent's Pokemon a couple times, and then they get passed out and die, and then you take your prize, and then you move on. But in Gen 2, that's not the case. You can keep energy on the board. There's plenty of times in Gen 2 where you'll have decks that utilize 3 to 4 energy attacks. And Gen 2 is also not a basic meta. So in Gen 1, because of the speed, because of the energy removals, evolution Pokemon were harder to get into play when your hand was disrupted so quickly. And so there was practically no evolution decks in Gen 1 outside of Blastoise. But in Gen 2, the entire meta is practically all evolution decks. So it's a completely different meta. Gen 1 is super fast, basic, 1 energy attacks. Gen 2 is evolved, convoluted attacks, with 3 to 4 energy, and basically just slow because the baby Pokemon don't die so easily. Half the turns are tails flips and you can't attack them. So anyway, I've rambled on about the format a little bit here, so let's get into some of the staples that you're going to be using. The Cleffa is definitely going to be a staple that you really want to know about. Let me just pull him up again because he defines this format. So even though we're about to talk about trainers, this is going to be the main way that you draw. You stick a Cleffa in the active, you put an energy on him, and you just shuffle your hand and draw a 7 every turn. You use the first couple of turns to set up your board, so get some energy in play. Find the right time to be able to launch your primary strategy, and the opponent does the same in the same time. One thing to mention is when you have a Cleffa versus another Cleffa in the active position, Cleffa must also follow the baby rule when it's using Eek. And so if you're a Cleffa versus Cleffa and you try to Eek, and if it's tails, you don't get Eek and you don't get a new hand. So Gen 2 is also really all about coin flips. There's so many coin flips in the meta that it's going to be a pretty exciting meta because of that, actually. So let's get into some trainers then. First trainer we're going to talk about is going to be Elm. So Professor Elm is kind of like the supporter for this meta. Says shuffle your hand into your deck, then draw 7, and you can't play any more trainer cards this turn. So, in Gen 1, you could play as many trainers per turn as you wanted. You could oak and discard and draw 7, and you burn through your deck this way. In Gen 2, there's really not that many good discarding of your deck options, at least even selective discarding. So Elm is going to be essentially shuffle draw, but you can't play trainers after you play Elm. So you usually want to leave it towards the end, and when you use this card, you're only going to be able to use like Pokemon and energy after you play it. So just be careful with how you use it. However, most decks are going to run 4 Elm just for your staple draw plus Cleffa. Most decks are going to run 3 to 4 Cleffa to be able to get set up permanently, because like I said, Gen 2 is all about evolutions, and with evolution you're going to need time and you're going to need cards to get them in play. So that's what these 2 cards will help you with. Another option that we have is Mary. So Mary says draw 2 cards, then shuffle 2 cards from your hand into your deck. Not nearly as strong as a full 7 from Elm, and not as strong as a Cleffa, but Mary helps. If your card or if your deck relies more on draw than other decks, then you can run a couple of Marys. Drawing 2 then shuffling 2 is actually really nice because you get to select the 2 you shuffle back in after you draw the first 2. So if you don't like any of the new cards you just drew, you can shuffle those back in and a couple of Marys, and you can really manipulate your hand pretty effectively. So here's an option: draw 2 and shuffle 2. So in Gen 2, there is the Legendary Collection, and the Legendary Collection is basically a bunch of reprints from Gen 1, the first couple of sets that got rotated. So in Gen 1, base set, jungle, and fossil got rotated, and along with those went computer search, item finder, and oak, of course. Those are the 3 big ones that really got rotated out. But Bill got reprinted in the Legendary set, and so it's available for Gen 2. So you just draw 2 cards. It's still good. Not a lot of decks run Bill, though, because Cleffa kind of makes up for a lot of the missing draw in Gen 2 that Oak was taken care of in Gen 1. But Bill's still useful. Again, if your deck really likes to thin itself out and gets it up as fast as possible, you're going to want a couple Bills, so that could help. While we're here, we can talk about Bill's Teleporter as well. He's another draw option. So flip a coin. If heads, draw 4 cards. Once again, not seen as much, because Cleffa's around, but Bill's Teleporter is another option. Heads flip, you draw 4 cards. If you're stuck in a hand, Bill can save you. So there's a couple of draw options, and Bill's Teleporter is one of them. Computer Era is another card. It's a promo card, so it's going to be harder to find in TCGOne, and basically says you draw up to 5 cards and your opponent can draw up to 5, and your turn is now over and you do not get to attack. So it tells you explicitly you do not get to attack. So this kind of reminds me of Tropical Beach, where you're basically doing this just to draw at the very end of your turn if you can't attack that turn. Not all that much played, but it is a way of drawing in this meta. Erica is going to be a staple here in this meta. Erica was also in Gen 1, but she's still available because it was in the Gym Challenge sets. So you draw up to 3 cards, and your opponent may draw up to 3. Pretty good. You're going to see a lot of Ericas with Imposter Oaks to basically... So there's going to be a lot of players that will play 2 to 3 Erica at once to both players draw a ton of cards, and then you hit them with an Imposter Oak, and their hand goes back down to like 4, I think it is. So it's a good strategy to be able to draw a lot for yourself and not give the same draw to your opponent. But otherwise, if you don't have that option, then Erica just gives you 3 and the opponent 3. There's an interesting one here. You're not going to see it in too many decks, but let me type this up correctly here. Okay, not allowed to go use my arrow keys. What's going on? Hold on one second. Technical difficulties. All right, here we go. All right, so Misty's Wrath is a card. It says look at the top 7 cards of your deck. Choose 2 of those cards and put them in your hand. Discard the rest. So you're discarding 5 cards and taking in 2. Now it's 2 that you want, out of 7, but you're still discarding 5 cards. So why would you ever play this card? There's going to be one deck in particular that will abuse this card pretty thoroughly. We'll go over it. We have a video planned with that deck, but just know that this is an option of basically finding specific cards out of the top 7, but you discard a lot to do so. Deck thinning and discarding is not that easy in Gen 2 versus Gen 1. In Gen 1, you had Computer Search, Item Finder, and Oak to discard a bunch of cards in it as often as you wanted. And that allowed you to actually thin your deck of cards that you don't need and just want to keep the ones that you want to draw. Misty's Wrath is a way of milling your own deck, which is rare in Gen 2, but it's not very, it's not very effective or efficient because you're discarding 5 cards when you play this card. So you're gonna have to be careful with how you use this card. We still have Sabrina's Gaze, and it's kind of like a shuffle draw. And let's say you play a couple of Ericas and your hand is like 9 or 10 cards, but these aren't the cards you wanted. Play a Sabrina's Gaze, and it says each player shuffles his or her hand into his or her deck and then draws a new hand of the same number of cards. So take note of a couple things. One is if your hand is big, you want to play a Gaze, it's basically shuffle and draw up to whatever your hand was, which is amazing. Number 2, it shuffles the opponent's hand as well. So if your opponent is planning out a strategy that across a couple of turns based on his given hand, this will shuffle his hand and basically reset his hand. So that's something to think about. Shuffle option, it's not like Elm where you can't play trainers afterwards. You can still play trainers even after you play Sabrina's Gaze. So it's a good option. And yeah, that's going to be it for a lot of the draw cards in this meta. So let's move on to Disruption. So some Disruption cards from Gen 1 have stayed in Gen 2, specifically Sneak Attack. Rocket's Sneak Attack says, look at your opponent's hand. If he or she has any trainer cards, choose one of them. Your opponent shuffles that card into his or her deck. So Sneak Attack is still here, and Rocket's Trap is still here. Let's pull it up here so that you can see. Rocket's Trap says, flip a coin. If heads, choose up to 3 cards at random from your opponent's hand, and your opponent shuffles those cards into his or her deck. So these cards are here in Gen 1. These cards were heavily played because there was no way to really recover it from a dead hand that effectively. But in Gen 2, you have Cleffa, and so these cards are actually pretty significantly weakened from their Gen 1 heydays, They're still played, and there are still disruption cards in Gen 2 that are effective, but with Cleffa being a 3 to 4 count in practically every Gen 2 deck, these cards are not going to be as impactful as they were in Gen 1. So know that they exist, know that they can affect you, but also know that Cleffa is really your escape rope to be able to recover your hand from these types of cards. Also, you also have Imposter Oak's Revenge. So it says discard a card from your hand. In order to play this card, your opponent shuffles his or her hand into the deck and then draws 4. So it's like a judge, it's like a one-sided judge for the opponent. Oftentimes, like I said, people will play a couple of Ericas and you'll end up drawing like 9 cards out of the 3 Ericas, and then they hit you with an Imposter Oak and you only have 4 cards left. Some people will also combine Imposter Oak's Revenge with Rocket's Sneak Attack and take out a valuable trainer so that your hand stays dead. If you have the Cleffa as an option, you can get bailed out. But if Cleffa is not an option, then you can technically still be stuck with a dead hand with these types of cards. So be on the lookout for them for sure. Moving on, there's not that many good ways of finding Pokemon from the deck. but because Cleffa also gives you such draw power that you really don't need that many, but there are a couple, and one of them is Good Manners. So Good Manners says, in order to play this card, you can't have any basic Pokemon in your hand. Then you show your hand to your opponent, then search your deck for a basic, and you put it in your hand. And then you shuffle your deck afterwards. So you basically, you find a basic Pokemon this way if you don't have one in your hand. So it's really good to get set up early on. You'll see a couple of decks play this. Evolution decks will want to get your basics out as fast as possible so that when you draw into your evolutions, you're ready to evolve when you need to. So Good Manners is a way of doing so. The other less used way is Master Ball. So Master Ball says, look at the top 7 cards of your deck, and you may choose a basic Pokemon or evolution card from those cards, show it to your opponent, then put it in your hand, shuffle the rest of your deck. So it's looking at the top 7, so you might not hit them all that much. It's an option if you're just desperate to find more Pokemon. If you're all about speed and you want to get set up in a couple of turns, then Master Ball could be an option for you. It's not that great, but it does see some play. Now let's get into the big trainers of Gen 2. So number 1 is going to be Goldberry. In Gen 1, there was really nothing like this, where it says at any time between turns, if there are at least 4 damage counters on the Pokemon Goldberry is attached to, you may remove 4 of them and then discard Goldberry. At the start of each turn, if there are at least 4 damage counters, do the same thing. So basically how this card works is it heals 40 damage if your Pokemon has 40 or above at the end of and the beginning of your turns. So it's a tool that you attach. It stays on the Pokemon until they hit 40 damage, and then it heals 40 and it gets discarded. So healing 40 damage is pretty nuts. If you remember from Gen 1, attacks, they don't do more than 30 to 40 damage. A lot of attacks do 20 damage. So healing 40 is another way that the meta has slowed down significantly. Now, be aware that if the opponent has enough damage on a Pokemon to knock them out in a one-shot, Goldberry will not activate. Goldberry only activates if the Pokemon is alive after the end of a turn and it just has 40 or higher damage. Goldberry will not activate if you have 30 damage on your Pokemon. So it'll just stay attached and wait until it gets above 4. So let's say you have a 70 HP Pokemon, right? And you take 30 damage, Goldberry doesn't activate, and then they do 40 damage to you. Now you're up to 70. You die, you get knocked out before Goldberry will activate to save you. But Goldberry and other, because Gen 2 is all about evolutions, your HP cap of 70, which was the gold standard in Gen 1, that's non-existent anymore. Lots of evolution cards get to 80, 90, and 100 and more. So the old gold standard of 70 is not really applicable anymore, and attacks in general also do a little bit more damage. In Gen 1, being able to one-shot something was very rare. In Gen 2, it happens a lot more, and in Gen 2, you're going to see a lot more 40 damage and 50 damage attacks. In Gen 1, you rarely ever saw 50 damage attacks without plus power, and you rarely saw 40 damage attacks without plus power. Not so in Gen 2 because they're evolution cards mostly. So Goldberry is usually a 3 to 4 count in a lot of decks, just because the healing is unrivaled in this meta. Another insane card in Gen 2 is Focus Band. So Focus Band says, if the Pokemon Focus Band is attached to would be knocked out by your opponent's attack, flip a coin. If it's heads, that Pokemon's not knocked out, and its remaining HP is 10 instead. Then you discard Focus Band. So this is a pretty crazy card, right? If it's a tool that you attach, and if the opponent knocks you out and you flip heads, you don't get knocked out. You still survive, and you have 10 less than your total HP. So it's crazy. It again slows down the meta. It might survive, like let your attacker survive an extra turn. What people often do is they put Focus Band on a Cleffa, and Cleffa's HP is 30, so it's very easy to knock out. But you have to flip heads on the baby rule to even attack it, And then you have to flip another coin, and if it's heads on the focus band, Cleffa still doesn't get knocked out. So you have to flip 2 heads to knock out a Cleffa or any other baby Pokemon. So focus band is pretty widely abused in Gen 2. You can also put them on your attackers, and your attackers survive an extra turn, like I said. So very powerful card. You're going to see it a lot. 2 to 3 counts in a lot of decks. And not every deck will use it all that effectively because there are other better cards to pick from. But this is such a good card that you're going to see it for sure. Another important card. So Goldberry, Focus Band, and then this card, Double Gust. You're going to see these cards in practically every deck in Gen 2. So Double Gust is really your main way of Gust of winning the opponent, of Lysandering the opponent, etc., etc. If you have any bench Pokemon, your opponent chooses one of them and switches it with your active. And then if your opponent has any bench Pokemon, you choose one of them and switch it with his or her active. So the opponent gets the same effect that you do, basically, but your opponent picks first. So what happens is you play Double Gust, you want to Lysander something or Gust of Wind something. They're going to Gust of Wind you first, and then you pick one of theirs. Now, because they get to pick and you get to pick, retreat costs become a very important part of this meta. Oftentimes, you'll see decks that are built to revolve around the fact that they have no retreat cost Pokemon. So if the opponent Gust of Winds you, who cares? You have no retreat cost on any of your Pokemon. You can just retreat free to your attacker while you've Gust of Winded them to get their attacker into the active for you to attack with. So that's one way that you're going to be able to move around the opponent's Pokemon, and they're going to move around your Pokemon. It's widely used. Again, we're talking about a 2 to 3 count in most decks, and pretty important. Now, also, status conditions are important in Gen 2, and Gust of Wind or Double Gust will allow you to break yourself out of a status condition. So that's another benefit that Gust of Wind provides. It gives you a pseudo switch, basically. There is no just flat out. There's no basic switch card in Gen 2 apparently. So Double Gust is going to be one of your main options. The other option is going to be Warp Point. So similar concept to Double Gust, but Warp Point says if your opponent has any bench, he or she chooses one, and then if you have any bench, you choose one. So rather than you picking your opponent's Pokemon from the bench, they pick it themselves and you pick yours yourself. So it's a switch for you and it's a switch for them, basically. Warp Point is not nearly as played as much as Double Gust, but it's still played. It gives you an option to switch in a format that doesn't have just a pure switch card. And it forces the opponent's active out of the position. So if your opponent's Pokemon requires a power that needs to be in the active spot to be used, Warp Point spoils that for them. So that's one thing to think about. Warp Point is it's pretty used. I'd say 1 or 2 in decks, but Double Gust is really going to be your primary way of using this effect. Let's see what else we got here. So Balloon Berry. In Gen 2, we have berry cards. There are tools that you attach. You saw Gold Berry. Now you're going to see Balloon Berry. Balloon Berry is like a floatstone. So 1 turn floatstone here. When the Pokemon is attached to retreats, discard Balloon Berry instead of discarding energy cards. So you attach this to a Pokemon. It's kind of like a temporary floatstone. If he ever gets put in the active and then he retreats, this card gets discarded instead of instead of your energy, and you retreat for free. So in certain decks, especially heavy retreat decks, you're gonna see a couple of Balloon Berries just for them to be able to move cards around. It's gonna be pretty useful. And to round out the end here, Miracle Berry. You're not gonna see this card all that much, but I did want to just include it just so that you're aware of its existence. It's a tool you attach to Pokemon at any time between turns. If Pokemon is asleep, confused, paralyzed, or poisoned, you just remove those effects. It's same thing for the start of the turn, and then you discard Miracle Berry. So the thing about this card is that it's good sometimes for certain situations. Like I said, status conditions in Gen 2 are pretty important. But there is another card that does a similar thing. Full Heal. So you have Full Heal Energy. So this is a colorless card that gives you that fully provides 1 colorless energy, but if you play it from your hand to a Pokemon, they're no longer asleep, confused, paralyzed, or poisoned. So like I said, Gen 2 has 3 to 4 energy count attacks. Full heal energy helps to get those set up, and you heal a status condition. So this is a trade-off. Most of the time, you're going to see full heal energy versus Miracle Berry, but wanted to you know that Miracle Berry does exist, and also full heal energy is an option as well. You know, while we're here on the subject of energy, I wanted to save this for a little later in the video, but let's just get into them because they're going to be important. So one big thing that Gen 2 introduced is special energies of the metal and darkness type. So in Gen 1, there was no dark Pokemon, there was no metal Pokemon, but in Gen 2, there are. And they don't have basic metal or basic dark in Gen 2. They have special dark and special metal in Gen 2. So we have Metal Energy is a special energy card. It says damage done to the Pokemon metal energy is attached to is reduced by 10. And this is after applying weakness or resistance. And if the Pokemon is not a metal type, then whenever the Pokemon does damage to something else, it also has its own damage cut by 10. So this is a pretty important card because you can attach it to any Pokemon out there, any type, and they're going to take 10 less damage from any attack. But the trade-off is if you're not a metal type, then you're going to have your own damage reduced by 10. The interesting thing about this card, and Jason Klasinski was one of the big proponents of how to use this right. It's like there's a tricky little thing to use this card with in terms of self-damage. So let's pull up Rocket Zapdos, right? Rocket Zapdos is technically legal in Gen 2, but you just don't see it as much because it's not as powerful compared to some of the evolution decks. However, in this topic that we were talking about, so Electro Burn does 70, and then you do 10 to yourself times the number of lightning. So let's say you have 3 lightning and 1 metal, right? So that means that you're going to do 70 to the opponent and 30 to yourself. But because metal energy reduces your own damage, you're going to do 60 to the opponent. And then it also reduces the damage that you would deal to yourself. So just up to that point, you would think to yourself, okay, so it's going to reduce its own damage by 10. So that means instead of doing 30 to itself, you're going to do 20 to yourself. But then you're still doing damage to yourself. And so Metal Energy says that if you have it attached to a Pokemon and you take damage, you reduce 10. So you reduce another 10, basically. Anytime you have an attack that self-damages, it's going to reduce 20 damage if you have metal energy attached instead of 10. It's a quirk in the way that the text is written on how the card works, but that's really the best way to remember the rules is you will do 10 less damage to everything else, and you'll do 20 less damage to yourself. So that's kind of how you're gonna remember how to use metal energy. But you can see here how important that would be if Rocket Zapdos had a metal here. Then while you do 60 to the opponent, you only do 10 to yourself, even though there's 3 electrics and you would have otherwise done 30 to yourself. So you can see the power already when you're able to reduce your own damage to yourself by 20, and you just reduce 10 to the opponent of your attack. So it's pretty good, and in some decks it becomes really good to be able to protect yourself from self-damaging attacks. The other type of special energy in Gen 2 is going to be Darkness Energy. So Darkness Energy says that you can attach it to anything, and it'll do 10 more damage to the opponent, but in between turns, you take 10 damage to yourself if you're not a dark type. So Darkness Energy is not really used like in decks that are outside of dark decks. One thing to mention, though, that's an important clause with Darkness Energy is that you'll use them on dark Pokemon. So let me pull up Umbreon. So here is a dark Pokemon, Umbreon. We're going to talk about him a little bit later, but if this guy had a Darkness Energy attached to him, he would not take 10 damage between turns, and he would still do 10 plus damage to the opponent, right? But if you look at what the text of Darkness Energy, it says if this energy is attached to, let me see where it says. Here it is. Darkness energy is attached to unless it's dark or has dark in its name. So basically, dark Pokemon that are not technically darkness type will still be able to use the benefits of darkness energy. So what do I mean by that? So Dark Muck is an example. Dark Muck is a grass type, as you can see, but because he has dark in his name, he can use darkness energy and not take 10 damage to himself and still do 10 plus damage against the opponent. So this is an important clause. It makes darkness energy a lot more utilized in the general population of decks because any dark deck, and there's several of them that are good, any dark deck can utilize darkness energy to the full benefit without doing damage to yourself. So Darkness Energy is really good. It's going to be played. You're going to see it. You're going to want to look out for it. This is the first Generation 2, that introduced Rainbow Energy. So Rainbow Energy works the same way as it does in the standard meta of today, where you attach it to something, it provides any type of energy, but you take 10 damage to yourself at the moment of when you attach the card to your Pokemon. So really good. This also counts for Dark and Metal. So with a Dark Pokemon and a Metal Pokemon, you can use Rainbow Energy to substitute for Dark type in your attack cost. Let's see what else we got here. So we went over Full Heal Energy. Let's go into Recycle. Recycle Energy is another one that is going to be utilized in several decks. Recycle Energy says, if this card is put into your discard pile from play, return it to your hand. So what often happens is people will put a Recycle Energy on a Cleffa and then use Eek. And so when the Cleffa dies, eventually it's going to die. You just get the energy back and you can put it on something else. Likely sometimes another Cleffa to keep the shuffling going. Or also you can use it to provide colorless energy for your attack cost. So Recycle Energy is really nice. The fact that you get it back in your hand is really nice. And then there is a lesser used but still good option to know about, Potion Energy. So there is, okay, so before we get into this, just know that there is no DCE in Gen 2. DCE got rotated in base set. So you're not going to be able to speed up the colorless cost as fast as you would in Gen 1, but you have all these other energy options. And so Potion Energy is one of those options. It says if you play this card from your hand, you can remove 1 damage counter from the Pokemon you attach it to, and it provides colorless energy. So it's a heal of 10. It's really good in some decks, especially really decks that are trying to deck you out using a bulky Pokemon, and you're just going to overwhelm the opponent with healing. So Potion Energy is nice for that option. So yeah, that's really all the energies of Gen 2 that are going to be very important. So let's get into some gyms. Let's get into Resistance Gym. And I can't type today. So in Gen 2, the amount of gyms are not all that varied. There's only a few of them that are existing, and this is going to be one of them. This is going to be an important one you'll see often. It says each Pokemon's resistance is reduced by 20. So negative 30 becomes a negative 10. You're going to see this in a lot of decks because some decks just basically can't break through resistance in Gen 2. Resistance in Gen 2 is still a negative 30 versus the modern era where it's a negative 20. And remember, back then, attacks didn't do that much damage. Back then, you're still looking at 40 to 50 damage per attack. So doing a negative 30 on a 40 or 50 damage attack is devastating, right? So it's still a very important component of the Gen 2 meta. And so Resistance Gym helps you to get around that in case that your deck type is just really negative against another common deck type that has resistance over you. Let's go into Cinnabar, if I can spell, Cinnabar City Gym. So this is really used for Blaine cards, and there is one card in particular called Blaine's Arcanine, which is paired with Typhlosion, which is a big deck in Gen 2. They're going to use this to cover their water weakness, so it's not going to be seen all that much outside of Blaine decks, but it's important in those Blaine decks, and you'll see them a lot. So Cinnabar City Gym does exist. Basically, you remove your water weakness for Blaine Pokemon. Rocket's Minefield. Rocket's Minefield is another trainer here. It's a stadium card. Says whenever a player puts a basic onto the bench, you flip a coin. If it's tails, you put damage counters on that Pokemon. So it's basically 20 damage. So anytime you put a basic down and you flip tails, you put 20 damage. There are some sniping decks out there in Gen 2, and Rocket's Minefield is what they use to get extra damage onto your side of the field and your bench when you put cards down. Broken Ground. Broken Ground says each player pays 1 more to retreat a baby or basic Pokemon. So it's definitely bad for babies because all babies have no retreat. And so when you actually have to pay for retreat, you really kind of compromise the point of using baby Pokemon in Gen 2. So this is very important. Also, basic Pokemon. Again, Gen 2 is mostly an evolution meta, and so it's really going to affect your baby Pokemon the most, this card. And then the last one, if I can type. I'm really bad at typing right now. Rocket's Training Gym. So this one says each player pays 1 more to retreat his or her active. So it's a better version of the other card. You use the other card in a special situation if you're targeting just the opponent's baby and you're not playing all that much. But Rocket's Training Gym is ubiquitous, says pays 1 more to retreat any active Pokemon. You're going to see this card for Muck decks. Muck has an ability that we'll talk about him later, but basically it makes it harder to retreat. This thing complements that. So that's really your gym options. There's a couple of things to mention in Gen 2. So in the actual Gen 2 meta, way back in the day, they had something called a Chaos Gym, and it's not pulling up, but let me go into then some other way of looking at cards, and I can pull them up here. So Chaos Gym says this card is not implemented on TCGOne because of the complications of programming it. But it was a big card back in Gen 2, and so if you're a person who actually played in that era or wanted to legitimately know how that era played, Chaos Gym is something you'd have to consider. So it says whenever a player plays a trainer card other than stadium card, you got to flip a coin to use it. If it's heads, you play it normally. If it's tails, the player can't play that trainer card, and then the opponent can use that card instead. And either way, the trainer in question ends up in the proper player's discard pile. So this is a huge card. It basically means that 50% of your trainers don't work unless they're stadium cards. So it was a very important card back in the day. And the fact that you could use the opponent's trainers if they flip tails is ridiculous. It's literally what it means. It's a chaos situation. It's Chaos Gym. It was big back in the day, but it's not implemented on TCG1, so you don't have to worry about it here, but just know that it existed and it was played. Speaking of other cards that are not implemented, we're going to go to Pokemon Tower. Come on. There we go. Okay, so Pokemon Tower was played back in the day. It says if the effect of a Pokemon Power, Attack, Energy card, or Trainer card would put a card in the discard pile into the owner's hand, that card stays in the discard pile instead. So there was a lot of decks in Gen 2 that would dump cards into the discard, pull cards out of the discard. Feraligatr is the biggest example, and Pokemon Tower makes sure that all of that gets stopped. So it was a pretty important card back in the day for disruption, for lock decks. This card was important, but it's not implemented on TCG1, unfortunately, because of the complications of how you would be able to program it. So know that it existed back in the day and was played back then, but on the online meta here in TCG1, it's not available. Maybe in the future. Sometimes cards, they're not implemented, but then they get implemented later on down the road. So it's possible we'll see it one day. I think there was at least another one here that's not implemented. Let's try to pull them up here. Eco Gym is another one that is not implemented. It says whenever an attack, Pokemon Power, or Trainer card discards another player's non-colorless energy, return that card to the owner's hand. So sometimes there's energy denial options in Gen 2. So also, discarding energy, you just get it back, especially if it's non-colorless. So basic energies and other types of energies, you get them back. So it's important. It was played. Unfortunately, it's not available on TCG1. Speaking of banned / not implemented cards, let's go into 2 Pokemon specifically. Sneasel was this was like one of the strongest decks in Gen 2 in the beginning. This is probably one of the strongest basics to ever exist in any format because of how powerful it was. So when this card was printed, doing one-shots was super rare. Here you have Beat Up. It says flip a coin for each of your Pokemon in play. This does 20 times the number of heads. So if you have 6 Pokemon in play, you can do, on average, 60 damage. Plus, if you use 2 Dark, that adds 10 plus for each Dark. So that would be 80 damage if you had 2 Dark Energy attached to Sneasel. So you're doing 80 damage that one-shots tons of stuff. Even now, even though Gen 2 is an evolution meta, you're still going to one-shot a lot of things. And so Beat Up as a basic with 60 HP, no weakness, no retreat, and a good resistance, and you're doing 80 damage. This card was broken. It was played, it destroyed everything, and it got banned. It got literally banned back in the day because of how powerful it was in the modified format, which is Rocket On. So this is a card that on TCGOne you can play it in unlimited, I think, but unfortunately it is banned for use in the meta here online. Another card, Slowking. So Slowking is interesting because it was a misprint. I'm sure a lot of you have heard the story, but if not, then back in Gen 2 in Japan, when Slowking was first printed, it never really saw play. But when it was brought over to the US, there was an error made in the translation here. So it says, the Pokemon Power says, Mind Games. Whenever your opponent plays a trainer card, you may flip a coin. If heads, that card does nothing. Put it on top of your opponent's deck, and then you can't be used if it's sleep, confused, or paralyzed. So in Japan, this was only meant to be used if Slowking was in the active position, which limits the use significantly. If Slowking is in the active position, you're not attacking, right? So Mind Games wasn't really used that much in Japan, but in America, that clause of it being in the active was not put into the translation. So Slowking worked off of the bench, and the Mind Games power stacked. So if you had 3 Slowkings on your bench and the opponent tries to play a trainer, then they have to flip 3 heads to use a trainer. Otherwise, they can't use it. And the card goes back on top of the opponent's deck, and so they literally draw it the next turn. So Cleffa helps with that, I guess, but despite that, it's just ridiculous how they screwed up the translation and how Slowking became so powerful because of that screw up. In TCGOne, if I understand correctly, I haven't tried it myself, but Slowking should work as it's intended to. So the opponent does flip the coin, and it's only when Slowking is in the active. And there is a card that can use and abuse this, and we'll talk about it. But I haven't tried it personally myself, but I will plan on doing it, and I'll make a video about it for y'all. So Slowking was, in the day, super powerful. Luckily on TCGOne, it is programmed to work the way it was originally intended to work, which was only in the active position. Okay, so let's get into some general cards, and then we'll get into some Pokemon. We'll quickly skim through some of the Pokemon involved later, but let's get into a couple of general cards. Just kind of speeding through it. So you have Recall. Says, for your attack this turn, your active Pokemon can use any attack from its basic or any evolution attached to it. Basically, you can use attacks from your basic, your past evolutions. It's useful for certain decks, but no, it exists because it got reprinted. It was in Gym Hero, so it didn't get reprinted, but, it's still available. Trash Exchange is another one. This card is used exclusively in the Feraligatr deck, but it says count the number of cards in your discard pile and shuffle them into your deck, then discard that many cards from the top of your deck. So this is a pretty crazy card if you think about how it works. Let's say let's say your discard pile has 20 cards in it, right? And then you play Trash Exchange. So most of those 20 cards are going to be trainers that you've already played to be able to adjust the board state to how you need to win, right? So let's say that you have 4 double gust, you've already burned through all of your double gust, and then you play Trash Exchange. Well, if you play Trash Exchange, you might get a couple of double gust back because it's kind of random. You basically shuffle your discard pile into your deck, then you discard as many cards as the discard pile originally had back into the discard pile. So maybe during that shuffling process, you recover a couple of double gust. You might also lose other resources along the way that you hadn't used yet. But it's really cool, and in Feraligatr decks, it becomes really, really good. And we'll talk about it when we talk about Feraligatr. So you also have Super Scoop Up. It's basically how it works. Flip a coin. If heads, return one of your Pokemon and all cards attached to it to your hand. Now you still have let me pull it up here. What is? I think it was Scoop Up. Yeah, I'm pretty sure you still have Scoop Up as an option, right? Let me make sure here. I'm almost positive. Let's just make a deck and we'll call it Rocket On. Then I want to see Scoop Up. Yeah, so see, it did get reprinted in the Legendary Collection, so you still have Scoop Up as an option. It says choose one of your Pokemon in play and return its basic Pokemon card to your hand, but you don't get your energy back, you don't get any tools back. Super Scoop Up lets you do that, but it's on a coin flip. Another thing about healing is Moo Milk. So Moo Milk is another way to heal your Pokemon. It says choose one of your Pokemon, flip 2 coins, remove 2 damage counters each time you get heads. So potentially you can remove 40 damage. Statistically, you'll remove 20 damage, but it's a way of healing that is a little bit better than Potion because you could potentially heal 40, but you can also heal nothing. So it's a risk-reward kind of card. And then an important card, Energy Charge. So remember the Metal Energy, Darkness Energy, all those special energies, Rainbow and Full Heal and Recycle and all that. Those are special energies, and so they're not going to be very easily removed from the discard pile, right? Trash Exchange gets a couple of them back, maybe with depending on how lucky you are. But Energy Charge is a better option. So it says flip a coin if heads, shuffle up to 2 energy cards from your discard pile into your deck. It's not specific for basic energy, so you can recover Darkness and Steel as you can see here in the picture. And yeah, so this is a good way to recover valuable special energy cards in a special energy deck. You're going to see this played in special energy decks, in Darkness decks, in Dark decks, in Steel decks. You know, anything that uses this type of special energy, you could potentially see an Energy Charge. So I'm pretty sure that is all of the trainers we're going to go over. So I'm going to go through some Pokemon real quick, and I'm going to really just kind of blitz through them because we're going to talk more about them in depth as the videos come out with the different types of decks. But we already talked about Cleffa. Let's pull him up again. He is the preeminent card in Gen 2. It says shuffle your hand into your deck, draw 7. You're going to see 3 to 4 Cleffas in every deck. It's just the best way to draw in Gen 2, and it's also a way to slow down the meta so that you can get set up. And the games in Gen 2 go for a long time. You know, they're gonna be close most of the time. You know, and then they go for quite a while. So get your seatbelts ready. Another baby Pokemon is going to be Pichu. Pichu says, for 1 energy, also just remember, baby Pokemon all have no weakness, no resistance, and no retreat cost, and 30 HP. So they're basically just completely splashable across any deck, and they all have colorless energy attacks. So you can use them in anything. And the baby ability or power, I say power is probably what you want to say it. The ability power, the ability rule. I mean, the baby rule is so important. It really works well for all types of baby Pokemon, so they're all very viable. So this one, Pichu, says does zap, does 20 damage to each of your Pokemon in play that has a Pokemon power, don't apply weakness and resistance. So it does 20 to every Pokemon power. This includes this includes Evolution, Basic, some other baby Pokemon. So Zap is pretty powerful, just doing splashable 20 to everything that has abilities. Gen 2 has a ton of ability Pokemon. So definitely this is going to be used. You'll see it. get rid of this thing as fast as you can if your deck relies on abilities, because otherwise this damage will start stacking up quickly and you're going to be screwed. Elekid is a unique one in that it's also a baby, 30 HP, you know, everything down here is the same, but instead of an attack, it has a power, and this power can be used from the bench. So it says once during your turn, you may flip a coin. If heads, do 20 damage to your opponent's active, and then either way, this ends your turn, and it can't be used if it's asleep, confused, or paralyzed. So what often happens is, let's say that you're trapped, your hand's dead, your Pokemon in the active is probably gonna die. He's not being used to attack at all. You're still trying to set up, you know. What can often, like, let's say also your active Pokemon's asleep or paralyzed, you're confused, and you'd prefer not to attack with them if it's confused, then just use Playful Punch from the bench. Elekid's power works from the bench, and while you flip a coin, you can still do 20 if it's heads, and then your turn ends. At least you're doing some damage in a situation where you otherwise wouldn't have done damage, so Elekid's really nice. You'll see it in a couple decks. Tyrogue is a pretty heavily played card back in the day. For 1 energy, to do 30 damage is pretty crazy. It says flip a coin if tails attack does nothing. So while it's a coin flip, and if you're attacking a baby Pokemon, it's going to be another coin flip. So you're trying to hit 2 heads to try to do 30 damage. But still, it's 30 damage for 1 energy. That's pretty cool. It was used, and it one-shots all baby Pokemon. So yeah, I mean, against Clefas, it'll still one-shot them as long as the coins flip right. Tyrogue was played. I don't see it too much on TCGOne, you know, but it's an option, and you definitely want to know it exists. And I think there's one more, Magby, that is seen often. Magby is interesting. It's a fire type and has Sputter. All Pokemon powers stop working until the end of your next turn. So you do 10 damage, and all powers stop working until the end of your next turn. So that obviously means that all of the opponent's turn and all of your turn so basically 2 turns, Sputter turns it off. And it does 10 damage with that. It's a baby Pokemon, which means that if they try to attack you, they gotta flip a coin. If it's tails, you can do maybe another 10 and start racking up damage that way. In the meanwhile, their powers are not working, and so if they rely on their powers to really set up their board state, this thing will stop that. So that's an option to use, and it's an option to consider for your decks. So those are the baby Pokemon. Let's go into the biggest deck in Gen 2 for Alligator. He is not this one, it's this one. So for Alligator, dominated Gen 2 back in the day because so many cards work so well with this combination of power and attack. He has 120 HP, so not easily going to be one-shot, hardly ever. Weakness to grass, obviously, and a heavy retreat cost. But the power says Downpour. As often as you like during your turn, you may discard a water energy card from your hand, and this power can't be used if blah blah blah. So the attack then says Riptide for 3 water. You do 10 damage, plus 10 for each water energy in your discard pile, and then you shuffle all water energy from your discard pile into your deck. So if you remember, we talked about Misty's Wrath, where you discarded 5 cards and you picked 2 cards from your top 7 of the deck. What they will do is they will abuse Misty's Wrath to discard a good chunk of your deck, and along with that chunk is going to be water energy, and then they hit him with a Riptide, and Riptide shuffles all the water back into your deck. But then if you have like 8 water energy in your discard pile, you're doing 90 damage because it's 10 plus the number of water energy. So its one-shot potential is absolutely off the wall insane. Now what happens though after the attack, right? It's hard to get like 8 water energy in the discard pile turn after turn, right? Well, that's where Trash Exchange comes in. We looked at it earlier. Trash Exchange allows you to basically shuffle your discard pile into your deck and then discard that many cards off top of your deck. So you're going to get fresh water in the discard that way. The Pokemon Power Downpour also lets you discard water energy from your hand. So there's also another card, Lieutenant Surge. I wonder if it'll pull up here. Is it this one? No, there's like another Lieutenant Surge card. The Treaty, No. Alright, I can't find it here, but there's a Lieutenant Surge card that lets you look at the opponent's hand, and then you discard that many cards, like discard how many cards you want from your hand, and you draw that many. So that's another way of discarding cards from your hand to draw some more. It's another way to get cards in the discard pile for trash exchange to, to maximize your odds. So yeah, Feraligatr is a pretty crazy deck. It was the clear #1 deck in the format back in the day. It won so many events back in the day. I'm not sure if it won Worlds or not, but it should have, considering how dominant it was back then. So yeah, you're gonna see this card. We're gonna showcase this card in its own deck. So look forward to that. Let's move on to the other big deck in the format, Typhlosion. So Typhlosion is Gen 2 is interesting, right? Your top 2 decks are fire and water. And since water beats fire, naturally that's why Feraligatr is so dominant. But Typhlosion is a huge deck in Gen 2 because, so weakness to water, 2 retreat cost, 100 HP. Like I said, he's not going to get one shot very easily. He's got a Pokemon Power Fire Recharge. So once during your turn, you may flip a coin. If heads, you attach fire from your discard to one of your fire Pokemon. And you can stack this ability. So you have 3 Typhlosions in your bench. You can have 3 flips of the coin to attach fire energy from a discard pile. There's a couple of really, really strong fire Pokemon, and accelerating fire energy is going to make their damage output just sky high. He has his own attack though, Flame Burst, 60 damage already for 4. I mean, 60 is insane, and because of Fire Recharge, you're going to hit 4 pretty often. It says flip heads, this does 60 plus 20, and if it's tails, you do you flip heads is 60. It's 80 total, and then you do 20 to yourself. If it's tails, you just do 60. So base 60 damage or 80 plus 20 to yourself. Attach a metal energy to Typhlosion, and you don't do anything to yourself, and you can potentially do 70 to the opponent or 50 base. So that's one option to think about. But still, otherwise, I mean, it's a really strong attack. Just doing 60 is already pretty nuts. Not many attacks can say they can do 60. And then to do potentially 80 even is even more crazy. So you're definitely going to see this card a lot. It's like the #2 deck in Gen 2, or used to be anyway. And yeah, so you often pair this with other fire Pokemon. We'll showcase him in its own video, so we'll go into some of the fire Pokemon then. But I want you to know that it exists and it was heavily played back then. The other big heavily played card is going to be Dark Gengar. This is a pretty insane card. So 70 HP, so a lot lower in terms of the stage 2s that you see elsewhere. But no weakness and, respectable retreat cost of 2. Fighting resistance is really cool. But the power is where the card really goes crazy. Deep Sleep says as long as Dark Gengar is in play, a player flips 2 coins for each of his or her Pokemon that is asleep at the end of the turn. And if either of them is tails, that Pokemon stays asleep. So yeah, I think the math is something like 25% of the time you're going to wake up. So deep, and this is if Dark Gengar is in play at all on your side or theirs, and it works against your Pokemon and the opponent's Pokemon. So this is a double-edged sword in some cases. However, just the fact that you're only going to be able to wake up 25% instead of 50 is what makes this card ridiculous. Now, look at the attack. Pull in for 3 Psychic, does 30 damage. 30 seems pretty bad, but then look at the effects. As if your opponent has any bench Pokemon, you choose one of them and switch it to the active, and then you do damage. And then either way, the defending Pokemon is now asleep. So what happens then here is you have a Lysander effect built into an attack. You do 30 damage to this Pokemon, and then he goes to sleep, and he has a 25% chance to wake up. So you can't hide with this attack. If you have an attacker powering up on the bench, this thing will drag it to the active and put him to sleep and do 30 damage to him. So it's really devastating. The worst of this thing is that I'm pretty sure, if I remember correctly, that pull in will hit baby Pokemon before the baby rule. Because the baby rule only gets an effect if it's in the active, but because it gets pulled from the bench, I don't think it applies. Not 100% sure on that, but I'm pretty sure I've seen that happen where Dark Gengar will hit a baby off of the bench and the baby just dies because it's 30 damage. And so there's no flip involved with that. So ridiculous card. Just the fact that you're not going to wake up but 25% is insane. Double Gust will help you to wake Pokemon up, and Full Heal Energy can do the same thing. But if your deck is not really designed to go against this card, you're gonna be screwed. And because it's coin flips, it can really defeat anything. So very powerful card. Another important card, which pairs well with Hoothoot. No, not Hoothoot. Noctowl. This is an important card because of the power. So first of all, free retreat cost and 60 HP. You know, respectable HP, but the retreat cost is really where it shines, because remember in this meta, double gust means that this doesn't become an easy double gust target because you can just easily retreat the Pokemon. So it's a good bench warmer, and it's got a really good power. So Glaring Gaze says once during your turn, you may flip a coin. If heads, you look at your opponent's hand, and if you see any trainers there, you can make them shuffle that one trainer away. And this affects stacks. So if you have 2 Noctowls in the bench and you flip 2 heads, you're getting rid of 2 of your opponent's trainers. So remember when Rocket's Sneak Attack and Rocket's Trap and Imposter Oak's Revenge, all of those were mitigated because of Clefas? Well, if you have those cards combined with Noctowl, you can technically destroy a person's hand even after a Cleffa. And then if you kill Cleffa in the meantime, then they're really screwed. So this is a really powerful bench warmer. So very useful to know that it exists. Another good card in Gen 2 is going to be Steelix. So Steelix is 110 HP Steel type. And 110 HP for Stage 1 is pretty ridiculous. I mean, for Alligator is 120 with a Stage 2. But Stage 1 Steelix here has Tail Crush and Metal Energy. So remember what happens with Metal Energy. You reduce damage by 10. Imagine Steelix with 3 Metal Energy. You're reducing damage by 30 every turn. And so remember that most attacks, they don't do more than 40 or 50. So you're reducing 30 damage in every attack without resistance. It's not affected by a resistance gym. So because this card is a huge tank, and there's enough healing in Gen 2 with Goldberry and Moo Moo Milk and all that stuff to where Steelix will survive a lot. There's a whole deck based just around Steelix surviving, denying prizes, and hitting opponents with Tail Crush, which, if you flip a coin, if it's heads, does 30 plus 20. If it's tails, just does 30. So 30 or 50. If you hit 1 heads, that's 80 damage between 2 turns. I mean, that's enough to knock out a lot of Pokemon. So it's very powerful, and it's very, very hard to kill outside of fire Pokemon. It's got his own deck. We'll take a look at it later. Murkrow is going to be the most annoying, probably the most annoying card in Gen 2, because if it's in the right conditions, you can't beat this card. That's how bad it is. So Murkrow's the dark type, 50 HP, no weakness, and no retreat cost. So 50 seems pretty low, but this first attack is just dumb. It says Mean Look. The defending Pokemon can't retreat as long as Murkrow remains your active Pokemon, and then benching or evolving either Pokemon ends the effect. So think about how this works. So remember that Cleffa is going to be your main Pokemon in the beginning of a match to shuffle draw, right? Well, Cleffa doesn't do damage. And if Murkrow hits Cleffa with a Mean Look, and if you don't have Double Gust or Warp Point or some other way of getting out of the active that's not just pure retreat, but that's trainer based, if you don't have that, you're screwed. Because Murkrow will trap Cleffa or another non-attacker in the active spot, and then it's just going to snipe you for days with Feint Attack. So the second attack here says, choose one of your opponent's bench, and this does 20 damage to that Pokemon, and it's not affected by weakness, resistance, or powers, or any other effects on its defending Pokemon. So Feint Attack is going to snipe you to death if it traps a non-attacker in the active. And Cleffa is one huge target because it doesn't attack; it just shuffles cards, and you draw 7. So Murkrow is like an auto win given the right situation for a lot of decks. This is why Double Gust is so important and so ubiquitous in Gen 2 decks, and Warp Point as well to a certain extent. But yeah, I mean, Mean Look is just devastating, and Feint Attack, the fact that he can snipe the bench is just ridiculous. This card was designed to be the most annoying card in Gen 2. One other thing to mention actually is the feint attack, because it costs 1 darkness energy. While if you're doing it on the bench, you're going to do 20 damage to the bench. But if you were forced to attack the active, darkness energy will add the extra 10. And so feint attack will do 30 damage if you have 1 dark, 40 damage if you have 2 darks to the opponent's active. So just keep that in mind. Crobat. So Crobat is kind of a specialty deck in Gen 2. It's not going to beat a lot of decks, but it really beats the top deck consistently, because the top deck in Gen 2 is Feraligatr. It's weakness for water. So Crobat hits you for weakness, and it damn near one-shots Feraligatr. So also just the attack itself is really good. It says flip 4 coins. Attack does 20 damage times the number of heads. And if you flip 2 heads, then defending Pokemon is now confused. So statistically, if you're flipping 4 coins, you're going to get 2 heads. And so you're going to do base 40 damage on average while you confuse the opponent. Cross attack is just nuts because confusion sucks. And then you have triggered poison with 1 energy. It says opponent attaches energy card to the defending Pokemon. It becomes poison, and you do base 20. So you threaten the opponent saying, I dare you to attach energy. If you do, you're going to get poison, and I'm going to do 20 to you. So really good card. It doesn't really beat all the decks, but it really beats Feraligatr, which is why it's such a big component in Gen 2. I'm not sure if this card will pull up here. It does pull up. Okay, cool. So, unfortunately, in TCGOne, getting promo cards is really hard. You have to do achievements. Let me actually show you what I'm talking about. Let me stay on the page. Let me show you what I am talking about. So you have achievements here. And some of these things are pretty straightforward. Like this one says reach level 21. And then you have the achievement. And every achievement you get a promo. Once you get a promo, you go to your quest. And in the quest it says duplicate a random promo. And sometimes you get a random pack. So this is how you're going to get promo cards. You're going to achieve the quest that gives you the card. And then you're going to get a duplication of a random promo. Sometimes you get a random promo just from the quest, the quest itself. So you're going to find Mew somewhere in here. I'm not sure exactly where it is. I know just flip through them. They're the same achievements for everyone. So just go through them and you'll see where Mew is. But anyway, Mew is important because of the power. So let's go back to what we were doing. Kind of losing my voice here. I've been talking so much. But Mew says prevent all effects of attacks, including damage done to Mew by evolved Pokemon. Remember, Gen 2 is an evolution meta, so Mew acts like a wall for tons of decks in Gen 2. It says, if it's sleep confused or paralyzed, but it's really good. Unfortunately, because it's a promo, you likely won't have it. I personally don't have it, and I'm waiting to get the achievement to start racking them up. So it's useful if you can get it. Let's talk about Dark Muck. So this is going to be seen often in Gen 2 because it's a grass type. It hits Feraligatr for weakness. And it's the sticky goo. As long as Dark Muck is your active Pokemon, your opponent pays 2 more to retreat because they're active. And there's stadiums that add another extra in there. So now imagine paying 2 energy to retreat a baby Pokemon. That's just dumb. Like, why would you ever do that? Dark Muck makes it happen. Sometimes what happens is you're playing Gen 2. You've played through so many matches. You just instinctively throw a baby in the active once your Pokemon gets KO'd. And there's plenty of times where I've faced against a Dark Muck deck that I'm just not thinking, and I just put a baby in the active. I keep forgetting the fact that I can't retreat him so easily because you normally can. So, pretty good card. Sludge Punch does defending Pokemon is now poison for 2 grass, and you do 20 damage. It's a low damage attack, but the fact that it hits water for weakness and you poison the opponent, the damage can definitely start stacking up there. So yeah, let's go into another one here. Dark Vileplume. Just for reference, remember the fact that because it's a dark Pokemon, you attach dark energy on it, it'll do 10 plus damage, and you don't take 10 damage to yourself. So that is one way of boosting this attack right here. So Dark Vileplume is still around in Gen 2, unfortunately, and it's the trainer lock is still as powerful as ever. It still just knocks out every trainer in the meta, so you can't escape it in Gen 2. It's still there now in Gen 2 because the matches are really long, and because they're designed to run slow, and because you have Cleffa, Dark Vileplume is not nearly as damaging as it used to be. Trainers, while they're important in Gen 2, the fact that it's evolution Pokemon who can one-shot people means that full trainer lock is not as devastating, but it's still really powerful, and you better watch out for it because if it catches you when you're off guard, you're gonna lose. What else do we got here? We have a good pair here. Erica's Victory Bell. So remember that double gust is really your main way of Lysandering / gusting the opponent. Fragrance Trap lets you do that with a power. So it's a stage 2. So it's an expensive bench warmer, but it says once during your turn, you flip a coin. If heads, the opponent, if it has any bench Pokemon, choose one of them and you switch it with hers or active. So it's literally Lysander, it's literally Gust of Wind in power form on a coin flip. So a lot of people will run it as a bench warmer, and it works for when you want to use it. It's obviously going to be a coin flip, so it's going to be, Gen 2 is all about coin flips, so you're not going to get around that. But it's a good option to know that it exists. The other really good card, if I can type, let's see here, Dark Alakazam. Yeah, so Dark Alakazam says 60 damage or 60 HP, so it's pretty low for stage 2. Weakness of Psychic. Psychic is a common type in Gen 2, so that's pretty bad. But it's got a good attack here. For a 2 Psychic and a colorless, it says Teleport Blast. You may switch Dark Alakazam with one of your bench Pokemon, and you do 30 damage, and you do damage before switching. So, here, remember when I said that Slowking was still played? Guess what? You can play it in Dark Alakazam decks. So, Slowking, what you can do is put a Balloon Berry on Slowking, and he retreats for free. And you put him in the active, or you can put Dark Alakazam in the active, and you teleport, and you put Slowking in the active, so the opponent can use trainers. It kind of works. It's kind of janky, but it's there. It's an option. It's probably the really only good way of using Slowking in the way that it's implemented here on TCGOne. But yeah, Teleport Blast, it's pretty powerful. Just hit and run, doing 30. That's really good, to be fair. Mind Shock is also useful, so don't apply weakness and resistance. That's very important because Dark Pokemon are going to be the bane of Psychic Pokemon's existence in Gen 2. Mind Shock gets around that, and you do 40 damage. I mean, that's good. For 3 Psychic, you do 40. 40 and 50 is your bread and butter in Gen 2, so yeah, Mind Shock is there, and if it ignores weakness and resistance, it's even better. Rounding up the end here is Umbreon. He's got his own deck. We'll take a look at it, but 80 HP off of an Eevee, and Feint Attack says choose one of your opponent's Pokemon. This does 30 damage to that Pokemon. The attack damage isn't affected by it, blah, blah, blah. The fact that it does a 30 snipe means that it knocks out baby Pokemon. That's free prizes basically, right? And it doesn't matter. So baby, you don't gotta flip for the baby rule. Feint Attack also, it costs 2 dark, so if you can get 2 dark energy on here and you attack the active, the opponent's active, you're gonna do 30 plus 20 is 50. So 50, potentially 60, depending on how many dark energy you have on him. But that's nothing to scoff at. Like I said, 40, 50 is your bread and butter in Gen 2. So do potentially 50 to the opponent's active with 2 dark, or snipe 30 to the bench, which is ridiculous. It's got its own deck. We'll take a look at it. And it's darkness, which means psychic resistance. Psychic in Gen 2 is important, and so this is a key resistance to have. No weakness, which is awesome. Rounding up the EVs is Espeon. Espeon, another 80 HP. Free retreat, which is important. Psychic weakness sucks, but it's got a good attack here. Psychic for 2 Psychic and 1 colorless says does 30 damage plus 10 more damage for each energy card attached to the defending Pokemon. Remember that in Gen 2, energy costs are 3 and 4. rarely you're going to see a primary attack that is based off of 2 energy. However, imagine then that the opponent has 3 energy on average. You're going to do 60 damage with Psychic if they got 3 energy, 70 damage if they got 4 energy. So it's powerful. It scales with the opponent. It's good. It's Psychic weakness, which kind of sucks, and so it's not like a tier 1 deck or anything like that, but it's really good. So definitely take a look at it. We're gonna take a look at it. We're gonna build a deck around it. And yeah, so that was it. That was all I wanted to get through in Gen 2. That's a ton of information. I went through it pretty fast. I didn't want to have this video get bloated to like 2 hours long. I don't even know how long it's been, so I hope it's not 2 hours. Some of you guys are going to look down and look at the video length and you'll be like, what the heck was he thinking? But I wanted to give you the full scoop on Gen 2 because we're gonna start doing some deck reviews in Gen 2. I want you guys to really get on TCG1, start playing. In TCG1, they implemented a new system for career mode where if you play a match and you win a match, or if you lose a match, you're gonna get something called ink. And with ink, you can actually create cards. So let's look at Rocket Zapdos. That's gonna be a big card in Gen 1. Back in the day, you would have to collect like 3,000 bits to be able to buy this card. Now you can assemble one for 720 ink. 720 ink seems pretty steep, especially if you're a new starter, you know, like if you've just gotten into the TCG1 and you're starting to build your collection, that's going to be pretty steep. But as you can see, unfortunately for newcomers, I've played on TCG1 for a long time now, so I had a ton of commons. And so if you look at commons, right? Let me try if I find one. So let me do Bulbasaur. So Bulbasaur Expedition is a common Pokemon, and you can dissolve any card for in this case they have you can dissolve it for different quantities depending on their class, but here I can dissolve 4 Bulbasaurs for 20 ink. So what you can do is, as you're opening packs from achieving your quests and achieving your challenges and beating other players, and you start opening new packs, dissolve all the commons you're not going to need, and then you can assemble just the deck that you want. And so it becomes much easier to build the deck now because of the ink system. As you can see, because I had opened a ton of packs in my day, I have a ton of ink to use, and so all this ink is going to be used to make new decks for y'all. So you're going to see a lot of cool decks now that I don't have to pull these cards and I can just build them. Makes things so much faster for making videos. So be on the lookout for some new content from me. I'm glad to be back. This is a fun game. I'm glad to come back to play this. Gen 1 and 2, like I said, I started playing the game back in Gen 1 when I was like a wee kid, like 4 or 5 years old. And it was fun back in that day. So definitely gonna be able to have some fun learning this new meta. And this isn't the end. I'm gonna make an intro video with all the details for the next format. So if you look here, right now on TCG1, you have, this is annoying me, sorry, but my OCD is getting in the way. But anyway, you have Gen 1, you have E-Card, you have Rocket On, and you have World. So these are the 4 early formats that you can play in career mode. We've made videos on Gen 1 already. We're about to make some videos on Rocket On. I've already started playing in Worlds, and so I'm learning that meta right now. E-Card, not so much, because Worlds encompasses all of the E-Card generation, plus Ruby and Sapphire and onwards. So you're not going to see that many E-Card players, and so I've kind of steered away from that format for now, because you're going to be able to use those cards in the Worlds 2003 through 2004 format. Maybe we'll go to E-Card one day, because from what I hear, it's actually pretty fun. If I can ever find players to play on it, I might be able to learn that meta. But for now, we're going to focus on Gen 1, Gen 2, which is Rocket On, and then I guess Gen 3, which is Worlds, if you want to call it that. I'm not sure if I will, but yeah, so that's the video, guys. If you got any questions or comments or any suggestions, let me know. Make sure to subscribe. Make sure to hit that like button. You know, all the usual jazz for these videos. And look out for some new videos from me. We're going to get into some really cool Rocket On decks. I'm really excited. I love this. Honestly, I'm a big fan of Gen 2. Gen 1 kind of is like, you know, most of it is just the really heavy hitters. You know, it's pretty basic. It's a basic format, super fast. You know, it's super, you know, not very competitive because it's so, you know, it's really like, if they hit, if you don't go first, you're gonna lose probably if it's against a well built deck because they can disrupt you. They can strip your energy so quickly. You know, dead draws are basically game ending in Gen 1. Not the case in Gen 2. So Gen 2 to me is a lot more fun. Closer matches, you know, it's really cool. So go online, start playing, start building your collection. Watch out for some new videos from me, and thanks for watching, guys. See you in the next one.